Assembly of First Nations and Cindy Blackstock announced today a $23 billion deal to compensate survivors of the First Nations child welfare system. Negotiations on compensation started when the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruled that Canada discriminated against on-reserve First Nations children in care. But the deal has gone through a number of rocky periods to get to this point. Cindy Blackstock, head of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, joins me now from Ottawa. Cindy, thanks so much for joining us here. 6 months ago, a similar deal to this one was shut down by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. What is different with this settlement agreement?
Well, what the tribunal found is that people who were eligible for $40,000 under its order, some of them were disentitled under the previous FSA. This agreement makes sure that everyone who's entitled to Canadian Human Rights Tribunal compensation will receive that compensation. And it also recognizes the injustices for people who are outside the timeframes of those orders, meaning people from 1991 to 2006. There's been an increase in over $3 billion to make sure that the people who are left behind are now included in this deal.
Now, Cindy, you had a number of concerns about the original deal. Have they addressed those concerns with this deal?
Yeah, we did have a number of concerns, and yes, they are addressed. So key things that we were concerned about before is that children who are placed in a non-Government of Canada funded placement, like staying with a neighbor, but they had to go there and be separated from their families due to lack of prevention services, those kids were disentitled under the previous final settlement agreement. They're now included in this one. And also the estates of parents. Those were disentitled under the previous final settlement agreement. That's included here. And we also have more supports for children under the agreement to make sure when they reach the age of majority, there's more supports available to them. So there's been a lot of fixes, and I think now that we have an agreement that recognizes the injustices of all the victims, but will also satisfy the tribunal's orders.
Now, you had just mentioned also previously that this agreement is worth $3 billion more than the original. So what has been added?
So monies for the disentitled victims, about $90 million in supports for children who are reaching the age of majority and will be entitled to compensation. It's really those two kind of key items that make up the bulk of the $3 billion.
And last one for you here, Cindy. When do you see compensation starting to flow?
So there's a bunch of steps that would need to still happen. One is First Nations leadership need to make a decision about this final settlement agreement tomorrow. Then we have to go back to the tribunal and let them know that we heard them in the first order and that there's now fixes in this agreement and everyone will get their compensation. Ask them to make a decision as to whether they feel it satisfies their orders. Then off to federal court and then to get the approval there. So those three pieces, and we're looking at in terms of time frame 9 to 12 months.
All right. Well, Cindy, we appreciate you bringing us this update here. We thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for having me, Daryl.